Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Jeff, and welcome to the first attempt at a YouTube tutorial for Microsoft Excel catered specifically to Norplas employees. So first things first, if you look down in the description of this video, you should be able to find a download to this particular file that I'm working with, and that way you can kind of follow along as I'm going through this video. If at any point in time you need to pause, kind of rewind and listen to something a second time, you're more than welcome to do so. I'll try to leave little pauses throughout the video so that way you have an ability to go back through it if you need to. So this video is going to focus on beginner Excel. The class usually takes right around an hour. The video may be a little bit faster just because I'm not going to have anyone asking questions. So go ahead and pause the video real quick, look down in the description, download the file, get it all pulled up, and then you can kind of follow me as we go through this file. So I guess to go ahead and get started, the beginner Excel class covers a couple different topics, all very basic. The first thing we're going to talk about is what is Excel? What is the program used for? What all can you do with it? How does it work with kind of our day-to-day processes at Norplas? I'll talk a little bit about navigation, kind of moving through Excel, how you move from cell to cell, how you move from sheet to sheet, stuff like that. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the ribbon. I'll teach you guys some useful keyboard shortcuts, talk a little bit about formulas, a little bit about functions. So first I'll talk about what is Excel. Excel is a Microsoft Office program that allows you to perform calculations, store data, and represent data graphically. So a majority of what Excel is actually used for is just that. It's a really great program for keeping track of a lot of data all at once. It allows you to manipulate data. It allows you to analyze it. You can take things like yield percentages, calculating the yields over 94% every month. That's something they can do very easily with Excel. You could do sales numbers if you wanted to look at profits, if you wanted to look at areas of improvement. You can track continuous improvement ideas month by month and see if it's trending up or down. Pretty much everything that you guys see in the monthly meetings is all based around Excel. So in Excel there are multiple sheets that each contain multiple cells. So as you open up an Excel file, all these little squares right here on the screen, these are all individual cells. Excel is made up of rows and columns. Rows move left to right and are numbered, so that's the 1, 2, 3, 4 over on the side here. And then columns move up and down and they're lettered, so it's going to be your A, B, C, D, E, F across the top. There are over 16,000 columns and just over 1 million rows in every sheet, which makes a total of about 17 billion cells in every sheet. That's a lot of storage. You can store pretty much your entire life on one of these Excel sheets. By default, Excel opens a new workbook with 3 worksheets or tabs. They can be found at the bottom of the screen. So if you guys look down here, we have all these different tabs. These are each a different sheet that has its own 17 billion cells in it. So go ahead and click on navigation down at the bottom to move on. So there are a few ways that you can navigate through an Excel sheet. Probably the easiest one is to use the arrow keys. So, most keyboards come equipped with the arrow keys. If you use the arrow keys, you can actually move through the cells without using a mouse or a keyboard or anything like that. You can also use the tab key, which will move you to the right. You can use the enter key, which is going to bring you down. If you hold shift and hit tab, that's going to bring you to the left. And if you hold shift and hit enter, it's going to bring you up. So there's a neat little trick that not a lot of people know about with Excel. If you use the tab key to move to the right and then you hit enter, it'll bring you back to the original column that you were in. So like right now I'm in column D. If I hit tab, 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 and then I hit enter, it's going to bring me back to column D on the next row. If you're entering multiple different fields of data all at the same time, this can save you a lot of time versus having to grab the mouse and click every single time. You can navigate through sheets by clicking on the tabs down at the bottom. So that's what we did to get from what is Excel over to navigation. There are also keyboard shortcuts you can use to save a little bit of time. If you hold the control key and hit page up, that's going to move one sheet to the left. If you hold control and hit page down, that'll move you a sheet to the right. So go ahead and click on the ribbon down at the bottom, or you can hold control and hit page down to move on to the next tab. So the ribbon is a powerful tool full of functions and shortcuts to make it easier to manipulate data in cells. Basically, the ribbon is this whole area across the top here. The ribbon has 8 default tabs. So you've got File, you have Home, Insert, Page Layout, Formulas, Data, Review, and View. The Home tab, which is the one that I'm on right now, Contains many useful tools for manipulating data and formatting your cells. You can find useful buttons like copy, cut, and paste right over here. There's formatting. You can color the cells. You can change the text color. You can do the different alignments. You can merge cells together. You can change the text orientation. All kinds of stuff on the Home tab. If you click on the Insert tab, it'll bring up a whole different tab full of different buttons. Contains tools for adding objects such as tables, charts, or shapes to your sheet. Most of the stuff that kind of beginner level people would use Excel for is going to be kind of right over here on the left side. There's charts, text boxes, stuff over here that you guys may use occasionally. For the most part, you guys will probably be working with pictures, maybe even shapes, kind of for beginner Excel. On the Page Layout tab, it allows you to adjust how your Excel sheet will print out if you need to print it. You can also choose whether to show grid lines or headings while in Excel or when printing. So by default, the headings are your ABCD across the top and the 1, 2, 3, 4 on the left. If you want to uncheck the view, you won't be able to see those anymore, even while you're in Excel on the computer. You can also choose whether you want them to show up when you print or not. So by default, it's off. So if you go to print, they're not going to be able to see the ABCD across the top or the 1, 2, 3, 4 across the left. But if you do want them to be able to see those when you print it, you would check print. Same thing for the grid lines. If you want the grid lines to show when you print, you would check this. If you don't want to see the grid lines while you're working on the computer, you can uncheck it, and that'll just get rid of all of your grid lines while you're working on the computer. If you go to the Formulas tab, it's a great tool for helping type out formulas. It can take control of the syntax of the formula for you, where you just tell it which relative pieces of information you need. This is really nice when you're first getting started with Excel. If you need to add up a bunch of numbers and use like the sum function or anything like that, it'll pretty much take care of all the syntaxing for you. It'll type the equal sum, it'll type the parentheses. You just tell it what cells you want it to add up and it'll do it for you. Pretty neat little tool in the Formulas tab. If you click on the Data tab, this is where you can find tools to link external data or manipulate your data. This allows you to remove duplicates, you can split columns, you can sort your data, filter data, all kinds of stuff in here. The Review tab is your error-proofing revision go-to spot. You can find a spell checker, comment bubbles you can add to cells, as well as protecting your sheet so nobody types over your data or your formulas. So all that information is right up here. Finally, we have the View tab. Here you can zoom in or out, you can change how your screen looks, you can show a clear indication of how pages will print on paper, or you can view multiple Excel files at one time. So if you guys look real closely at the little dashed lines here, that's based off of being on the page break preview. So if I go ahead and click on that, you can see right now that this particular page that I'm working with would print on 3 separate pages. You can actually physically adjust it by clicking and dragging these. If you want to make it a single page or 2 pages, you can kind of set up a manual custom page layout when you go to print. So I'm going to go back to the normal view. By default, there are only 8 tabs you will see in Excel. There's also a Developer tab which can be enabled, and I already have that guy enabled. This is something that you would use for macros if you wanted to try automating a repetitive task such as coloring a cell, giving it a border, changing the font or the size of the font, all with a single button click. You'd basically record it ahead of time and store it in a macro, and then you could run that macro using a single button, and it would apply all 4 of those things with one click. You can hide the ribbon by double-clicking any of the tabs. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Home tab, and then if I double-click it, the ribbon's going to disappear. If the ribbon is hidden and you want to show it, if you click it a single time, that'll give you all of the options. So if you needed to adjust the color or anything like that, when you click back onto the sheet, it's going to hide it again. If you wanted to anchor that ribbon back into place so that you could always see those buttons, you just double-click it again and it'll anchor it. Go ahead and click on the Useful Keyboard Shortcuts tab down at the bottom, or you can do Control Page Down. So most people with a little practice will be able to use Excel for their basic needs. What separates the good from the great, though, is the ability to save time with keyboard shortcuts. So when I teach the Excel classes at Norplas in person, the biggest thing that I always tell people is the keyboard shortcuts are going to save you a ton of time. Just like with anything else, practice makes perfect, and you'll probably have to use them a couple times before you memorize them, but they're definitely worth doing. So the first keyboard shortcut that I talk about in the beginner class is Control and A, and that's short for Select All. So a little note for this, if you do this over a block of data, it will only select that block. If you do it over a blank cell, Or if you do it in a block and do it twice, it'll highlight all 17 billion cells. So for instance, I'm going to click on one of these cells in the block. And if I do Control A, it's just going to select that block of data. If I do Control A again, it's going to select all 17 billion cells on the entire sheet. If I click on a blank cell somewhere, and then I do Control A even just one time, it's going to select all of the cells. The alternative for doing this without using a keyboard shortcut is to click this little triangle up in the corner in between the A and the 1, and that'll select all 17 billion of the cells. Control S is the keyboard shortcut for save. Pretty straightforward. Control P is for print. A lot of people confuse this one with paste, but paste is actually a little bit further down on the list. So Control P will print out your file. Control C is copy. Copy will leave the original cell when you paste it somewhere else. So if I do Control C to copy this cell, if I go click on another cell and then paste it, the original is still there and I have a copy of it. Control X is cut. It works similar to the way that copy works. It's going to give you those little dashed lines around the cell, but when I go to paste it, it's going to physically move it from the original spot to the new one, so the original is not going to be there anymore. Copy and paste will work with all formatting that's in the cell as well. So if you take a cell that's yellow and you copy it and you go to paste it, it'll paste the formatting as well. Control V is the keyboard shortcut for paste. So these ones are kind of easy to remember. X, C, and V are all right next to each other on the keyboard. I like to remember X if you think of like scissors for cutting, C for copy, it starts with a C, and then if you think of like the old school Elmer's glue bottles, kind of the little orange nozzle looks like a V, that's what I remember for paste. Control Z is probably going to be one of your favorite keyboard shortcuts. This is undo. This is your oops button. So if you accidentally delete a whole bunch of your data, or if you move something and didn't mean to, you can do Control Z and that's going to undo the previous action. Control Z will work with everything except for macros. Once you're on a macro, you can't undo it. Control Y is pretty similar to Control Z, but it's redo. So if you delete something, you want to undo it, but then you want to redo it, you could do Control Y to redo it. Control W is going to close your workbook, but it will not close Excel. So if you have multiple different workbooks open, it'll just close the one you're in. It may ask you to save first if you made changes. If this is the only workbook you have open, it'll bring you back to that kind of intro page when you open up Excel where it asks if you want to do a blank workbook or open up a previous workbook. Control and any of the arrow keys you can use to move to the top of a block of data or the sheet. And basically the way that these four work is they will move you all the way in one direction until you hit data or you hit the end of the sheet. So if I'm inside this block of data and I do Control down, it'll bring me just to the bottom. Control up will bring me to the top. Control right is going to bring me to the right of the block. Control left will bring me to the left. If you don't have any data, say like below you, and you do Control down, that's going to bring you all the way to the bottom of the sheet. So I was talking about how the sheets have a little over 1 million rows. This brought me to row 1,048,576. So if you wanted to click and drag and scroll, it's going to take you a really long time to get all the way down to row 1 million. So if you wanted to do it quickly, you could do it with Control and the arrow down or Control arrow up. So those are some really useful keyboard shortcuts that I usually teach in beginner Excel. Go ahead and click on the Formulas tab down at the bottom, or you can hold Control and hit Page Down to move forward. I'm going to click on Formulas. In Excel, formulas can be used to carry out calculations. They can also be used to reference other cells. So when I teach this class, I always tell people the most important thing from this class, if you remembered nothing else, all formulas in Excel have to start with an equal sign. This is your way of letting Excel know that you want it to do some sort of formula or you want it to do a function. So for instance, if I type equals 5 plus 2, I'm going to get 7. If I type equals 7 times 5, I'm going to get 35. If I just type 7 times 8, but I don't put the equal sign in there, it's just going to show up as 7 times 8 because it didn't realize I wanted it to calculate. Same thing, if I just type 2 plus 1, it's going to display 2 plus 1. It's not going to give me that 3, but if I do equals 2 plus 1, I'll get that 3. So there are a couple different ways you can type formulas. So let's say you want to add the following numbers. So I have a 5, a 2, and a 6. If I were to click on an empty cell somewhere and type equals 5 plus 2 plus 6 and hit enter, that's going to give me 13. So that's what I did in this cell right here. You can also use references. So go ahead and click on this yellow cell right here, and we're going to type an equal sign, and that's going to start our formula. And then I want to click on the cell that contains the number 5. So I'm going to move my mouse up to this 5, and I'm going to click on it, and it's going to type A15 for me. And the reason that it does that is because that 5 is in column A, row 15. So its cell is A15. So as of right now, I'm linked to that cell. Now, if I still want to add that 5 and that 2 and that 6 together, I'm going to click on the 5. It's going to type A15. I'll type a plus, and then I'm going to click on the 2. It's going to type a B15 for me. I'm going to click on a plus, and then I'm going to click on the 6. And so if you look down here in the formula, you should have equals A15 plus B15 plus C15. So what it's doing is it's adding whatever is in the first cell plus whatever's in the second cell plus whatever's in the third cell. So you can go ahead and hit enter, and you should still get that 13. The nice thing about using the cell references is if you were to change any of your 3 numbers, it would automatically update your formula. So if I wanted to change this 2 to a 20, it's automatically going to update my 13 to a 31 because it's linked to these 3 cells. So now instead of doing 5 plus 2 plus 6, it's doing 5 plus 20 plus 6. When you hard punch them in using a formula like this where it's the equals 5 plus 2 plus 6, if you were to change one of these, this doesn't automatically update. So now let's try something a little more difficult. For instance, say you want to calculate sales tax on a new car. If you multiply the car cost by the sales tax, you'll get the subtotal, the amount of money you're going to pay in taxes. If you add the car cost and the subtotal, you get the total cost. Both of these will be formulas that need to start with an equal sign. So say you've got a car that costs $20,000 and you want to figure out a 6% sales tax on it. If you click on this first yellow cell for the subtotal, you start with an equal sign. You're going to click on your $20,000 and it's going to create a link to your A37. From there, you want to multiply that $20,000 times 6%. So I'm going to type an asterisk, which is a little star, and then I'm going to click on the 6% sales tax. Now, if you hit enter, it's going to give you $1,200 for your subtotal. Now, if you want to try to figure out the total, you need to know the cost of the car and what you're going to pay in taxes. So I'm going to click on this total, this yellow cell. I'm going to type an equal sign. I'm going to click on my $20,000 for the car. I'm going to do plus, and I'm going to click on that $1,200 that I did for the subtotal and hit enter. And I should get a grand total of $21,200. So I use references and we can see the numbers anyways. What if sales tax were to change? So if you typed equals 20,000 times 6%, it'll still give you that $1,200. But if we change the car cost to sales tax, it wouldn't automatically update the subtotal or the total. Referencing the cells A37 and B37 in this case will automatically update the subtotal and the total if the car cost or the sales tax were to change. So if I wanted to use 8% sales tax instead, it's automatically going to update the subtotal and the total, which is pretty nice. Saves you a lot of effort going back and changing things around. So go ahead and click on the Formulas tab at the bottom or press Control and page down and we'll move forward. So the last thing that I want to talk about for beginner Excel is the functions. Functions come in handy when you're dealing with lots of data at once. So a function still starts with an equal sign just the way that a formula would. There are quite a few common functions that people use in Excel. Sum, product, average, count, and count A are some of the most common ones that like beginner Excel people would use. So the syntax of a function is important to know. Syntax is basically just how the function is typed to make sure Excel understands what you want it to do. Each function has a set of parentheses and contents within those parentheses. If there are multiple criteria you need for the formula, like a range and a value, you have to separate those with a comma. So if you look really closely in the syntax while you're typing up a function, you'll be able to tell kind of where the parentheses are, where the commas go, stuff like that. It all makes more sense kind of when you practice it. Say you want to add total profits for an entire year. So we have profits for January, February, all the way down through December. If you wanted to do this with a formula, you could type equals B14 plus B15 plus B16 plus B17 all the way to B25, but that's going to be a pretty long formula, and there's a lot of risk for error if you miss a plus sign, or if you accidentally add a cell twice, or if you skip a cell or something like that. So we could use a sum function, and that'll make it easier because you can click and drag and select all the cells at once. So go ahead and click on this yellow cell that I'm in. We're going to type in equals, and then I'm going to type sum. And when you type sum, you're going to get a little drop down that has all the different formulas that Excel knows that include the word sum in it. Now in order to actually get inside of the sum function, you have to either double click where it says sum, or you can put a left parenthesis. It does not matter whether you type it in capital or lowercase, it'll work the same either way. And usually when you hit enter, it capitalizes it for you. Some people prefer to type it in all caps. I usually type it in lowercase. But if you double click sum where it's blue, where my cursor is right now, it should make it capital, and it'll also give you a left parenthesis. So now that it's capital and I have a left parenthesis, it's asking me for a number. Now this can be a single cell or it can be a range. So I'm going to move my mouse over to January's number, that 4,237. I'm going to click and drag all the way down to December's number, and then I'm going to let go. And if you click and drag, it should do a little blue box around those numbers, and you should see the little cut copy dashed lines that are moving. And if you look in your formula, it should now say B14 colon B25. That little colon just shows a range of cells, everything between B14 and B25. Now normally when you want to end a function, you have to type a right parenthesis in order to close it off. For kind of beginner purposes, if you're doing real simple functions like this, you can hit enter without the parenthesis and it'll type it for you. So I'll go ahead and hit enter, and it gives me 55,134. So that's the sum of all 12 of these numbers. So that's really nice. If you went to go type all these numbers into a calculator, or if you wanted to add them one by one, you've got a lot more risk for error. But when it's typed in this way, you have a really clear visual. You can see all 12 of them. Everything's typed in correctly if you use the formula, because all you're doing is linking to them. And then also, if you were to change one of them, like say maybe April, instead of 4,879, it was supposed to be 4,789. Maybe you mixed up two numbers. If you go back and you adjust that cell, it's automatically going to update your sum function because you adjusted a cell that the sum function was referencing. So there's another neat little shortcut that you guys can do, and it's something called AutoSum. You have to hold the Alt key and you hit the equal sign, but before you do that, you want to make sure that you are either directly underneath or directly to the right of data. So I'm going to click on the cell that's right underneath December's number and do Alt equals, and it's going to type equals sum. It's going to automatically select all the data that's right above it, and it's going to type that right parenthesis for me. So before I hit enter, I have the ability to adjust this if I want to move to one of the corners, if I only want to show like the second half of the year, or if I want to include everything first half of the year. I can adjust all of that before I hit enter. But once I hit enter, it's going to work exactly the same way as the sum function that we typed ourselves would work. So there are a couple other functions that are just like sum. They work just the same way. If you want to find the average profit, I would do equals average, and I'm going to type equals AVE, and then if you look, the second one down is average. So I'll double click that. It's going to type it the rest of the way out for me. It's going to make it all capital. It's going to give me that left parenthesis. And now same thing as before, it's asking for numbers. So you can either do a single cell or you can do a range. So I'm going to click on January's number. I'm going to drag down to December's number. I'm making sure that I'm not grabbing that 55,000 down at the bottom because that was the sum. So I'll have my average from January down to December. I'll hit enter. So the average was 4,587. You can use the max and the min functions in order to find the highest number and the lowest number within a range. So it works the same way as sum and average. I'll do equals max, double click it. I'm going to click and drag for January down to December, and then I'll hit enter. So the maximum was 5,208. If you kind of look through there, October had the 5,208. We can do the same thing with the min, equals min, double click it, makes it capital, gives you that left parenthesis. I'm going to click on January's number, drag down to December, I hit enter. So 4,076 is our minimum, and November had the 4,076. So go ahead and scroll down a little bit. So some functions have multiple criteria. For instance, there's something called the COUNTIF function that people use pretty often. So when you type equals COUNTIF, it's going to give you a syntax where it says range and criteria. So I'll go down here into this yellow cell, equals count. I'm going to find the COUNTIF and double click it. It's asking me for a range and a criteria. And if you guys look closely, right now range is bold, criteria is not. So I have to tell Excel where the range is first, and then I need a comma, and then I'll tell them the criteria. So I want to count how many of these cells right here are equal to 40. So I'm going to select those cells, that's my range. Now to get from range to criteria, I need a comma. So I'm going to type a comma. And now if you guys look down in the syntax, range isn't bold anymore. Now criteria is, because now it's asking for the criteria. So out of that range, how many of them are 40? So I'm just going to type 40 in, and I'll hit enter. And now I got a 2. So if you guys look through these cells, 2 of them are equal to 40. So the way that the COUNTIF actually works is it goes cell by cell, and it checks to see if they match that criteria. So it's going to say, does 25 equal 40? No. Does 30 equal 40? No. Does 35 equal 40? No. Does 40 equal 40? Yes. Does 40 equal 40? Yes. Does 50 equal 40? No. Does 55 equal 40? No. Does 60 equal 40? No. And then it'll figure out how many yeses there were, and it'll add them up. So there was 2 of them. That's how we got a 2. So go ahead and click on what's next down at the bottom. So that's it for beginner Excel. Hopefully you learned something, and if there's anything you struggle with, by all means, you're welcome to rewind and watch it again, and hopefully it clicks for you. If not, you're always welcome to reach out to me. As of the time that I'm making this video, I'm in packaging up in the paint offices. You can always go to HR and ask them to get in touch with me if you need help with any of this. So thanks for sticking around. Here's a sneak peek of what I teach in the intermediate class. Charts, so like you can see in the What is Excel, charts, how to insert them, how to add the data to them, how to format them, stuff like that. Autofill, what is it and how is it done? Conditional formatting, something else you can automate in terms of coloring things, adding borders, making the font bigger, smaller, changing the font, giving it color, all kinds of stuff. You can automate that based on what's typed into the cell. Data validation, and that's drop-down menus inside of each cell. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you learned something. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and best of luck. Thanks.